I will now start the recording, and later on we will talk about that, because I understand we might improve on this side and maybe limit our recording to a certain area of the webinar and then stop it afterwards. So as of now, if you prefer not to be too visible on the screen in the future, say on YouTube, just turn off your camera and you will be fine. Lesson 7. So time flies, doesn't it? We have been sharing now for 7 weeks some concepts and ideas and practices to help ourselves in a very particular and special quest. The story so far, as we normally say, every time we try to say that under a slightly different point of view. So we've discovered, or we have become aware, that there is a precious part inside of us that for some reason has brought now us in contact, or at some point in our life, with a central mystery of life. That is, that there is a hidden reality, rarely visible in our life. And the path to uncover it starts from within. Listening to the subtle voice that speaks to us about this requires a particular state of consciousness. And that is easily lost and doesn't always come. In fact, it must be sought with efforts. And we have discovered that it's a quite rare event to become conscious enough to get in contact with this subtle voice. Forces from inside of us and from outside seem to be joining together in order to prevent us from reaching and maintaining this state of presence, which is so advantageous for our inner growth and is so inconvenient for the programming and the control that otherwise really easily has the upper hand on everybody. People may even be so low in their state of consciousness that they lend themselves to being used against others who are on the path to awakening. So there are really difficult odds against which we are to begin our quest. And yet, each of us has come in contact with at least the beginning, the gateway into a way out of this current situation, which some call the prison planet or a prison without bars. Well, it would be better to say that the bars are not visible and they are not made of physical matter, but they are made of other matter. And we know that we are talking about things that have a reality which is more tangible in other realms like the astral. Anyway, they work really well, as we know, and the more we observe ourselves, the more we understand that this sort of prison is extremely efficient. In fact, in great percentage of humankind, it is unchallenged and really keeps everybody where some entities want us to be. According to some ancient teachings, we are at the very core small sparks of the divine, which have come here to perform some tasks and to help the divine in achieving something. We have two different ways to return home within this huge light and consciousness, which we can call the divine or the source of God. One way is to return just as naive and as unexperienced as we came out. Like, well, we tried, and nothing particular happened, so we go back. Another way to return is having blossomed into something new, having turned into a being of a higher order. Normally, there are very few cells in our body that transcend their status of cells. And if we see ourselves as a cell inside a bigger body, we may notice that there is only a single particular type of cell which may turn into a being of a higher order, and that is a sexual cell. Only a sperm cell or the ovulus may turn into a complete being. And that is why there is so much mystery and so much censorship about what sexuality is. This is just a brief mention of something which is a very big and important topic. Often in esoteric teachings, the Christ is associated with sexuality in a way that is often veiled by metaphors and like hidden from the looks of those who are not prepared. I am just mentioning this because you may find when reading and when meditating that there is a deep connection between what we are and what we could be. And the path from one to the other has something to do with an energy called the Christ. All of this is too deep and too important to face in a small lecture like this. But I'd like you to be aware, because it may be useful for you in a later stage. So if we are able to turn into something bigger, something better, something of a higher order, like an animal into a human, or a human into an angel, somehow the divine experiment has been successful. And when we go back into the belly of the Absolute, we may say, with a bold statement, that the divine is growing in some sense and is taking in a new part of itself, which before it didn't have. I'm speculating about very high things here. This is just to give you a feeling that if the universe has been created, maybe there's a goal in that. And the goal normally comes from that who decides to create. So just a bit of a reference to the fact that we might somehow be helping God if we do things properly. And that is quite an undertaking. Well, if this doesn't motivate one, then what will do? Before we move on, I'd like to suggest a little practice we can do together that we have called the singing in the valley. But don't worry, you don't have to sing. This is just a metaphor. The idea is, what happens in this empty valley in which I may find myself if I do internal silence, if I introduce intentionally something? So, what will the valley return to me? This is a small reference also to a beautiful movie called Meeting with Remarkable Men. That is let's say, movie version of a book by the same title written by George Gurdjieff. It's one of the rare occasions where the movie is just as, I would say nice, yes, and enjoyable like the book itself. So they have a competition there. And whoever is able with a musical instrument or by his voice to have the valet sing along with him or her will win the contest. Well, we are trying to do something along those lines, but the valet is an inner valet. So for those who would like to participate in creating this sort of magical vibration, you can just relax, turn off the camera if you want to feel more intimate. You may close your eyes. Enter in a state of presence. You may do that by looking for your own observer inside and perceiving the observer. There you are. Let's observe the valet of our mind. It is now empty, and if something comes along, we just let go of it, because we own this valet. We are in charge. We are the owners of this place. We can enjoy the silence in this valet. Nothing can come which is not under our own control and creation. It's a very quiet place. Our breath can be quiet. Let's take a moment just to observe everything inside of us. If there's any tension, let's release it. Let's return to our inner valet of the mind. At this point, it's time to sing. So choose a word or a small sentence, something positive that you will sing. A word, for example, like love or unity or harmony. A sentence like, I want to know the truth. Something positive without negative words. And as you have chosen your word or your short sentence, sing it loud 3 times in your valet. And then listen up. This exercise can, of course, be done with plenty of time and more repetitions in the intimacy of your own bedroom. This was just a taster for you. So when you feel comfortable, you can move your body a little bit, breathe deeply a couple of times, and return with your eyes open. And of course, you're welcome to share anything if you would like, or just to enjoy that state that you yourself have created inside of you by virtue of this little exercise. Anyone got lost in the valley, or everybody's back? Looks like everybody's here again. So thank you, Johnny, for your gesture of okay. Welcome back. You all seem rejuvenated. You must have very good air in your valley. There is a topic that I would like to touch upon that was part of one of our past lessons, but there wasn't enough time to cover it. And I'd like to talk about that before we move on. And that was a bit of a more precise treatment of the idea of how some systems are designed to harvest our energy. For those of you who have read books by Robert Monroe, you may be aware that there is a sort of energy that is produced by our feelings, and that in certain environments is called luge, so that there is a new word in the vocabulary to describe that, because that is considered food by a certain type of beings which live in subtle worlds, not necessarily beings with a body. Now, in order to harvest this sort of energy, there are several mechanisms in place, and they are the main ways that the control system uses in order to take advantage of the human being. One mechanism is the creation of thought forms or egregora. So according to the school where you learn about this, you will hear this term. So to create an egregora or a thought form, what you need is have a certain number of people thinking about something repetitively. It's not hard to find examples of this, because most mainstream religions and ideologies and cults base their teaching upon repetition. When you can get enough people to repeat something enough often, or let's say a sufficient number of times, then a thought form is created in the astral world, which has a life of its own. So you can expect that, like all life forms, it will do whatever it can in order to survive. And at that point, it sort of detaches from the original thinkers and floats around in the astral realm, or we could say in the morphogenic field of humanity, which is a term created by Rupert Sheldrake. That is the field which somehow shapes the general average thinking of humanity. And from that point, the thought form tries to create situations which elicit that same type of thinking that created it in the first place. So if it was created by fear, it will try to instill fear, strike fear in our hearts by creating certain situations. And that may be just inside of us or by outside events which connect to our inner fears. As always, there is something outside which may try to draw us into a certain condition, but it can only do so if there is a hook inside of us that can be grabbed and pulled. the more we clean ourselves, the more we become aware of our weaknesses or defects, and we clean them. And then the less opportunity there is for an outside mechanism to grab us and pull us in a certain direction. We become less and less material and less grabbable, if that word exists. Okay, so we can avoid basically falling victim of these mechanisms by cleaning ourselves. At the start of our journey, of course, we still have a lot to do in that direction. So we will find ourselves taken. And one of the effects of being taken is that we fall into a lower state of consciousness where we are identified with whatever is happening. We fall into the drama and we don't feel ourselves anymore. Of course, this is the concept that we may find in the books by Carlos Castaneda. So when they hook our attention, we lose ourselves. And that is the beginning of a period in which we don't exist. Then at the end, which may be a lot later, we wake up again and we look back and say, ooh, I lost myself in that. If we do. How does the control system create thought forms which then push us in certain directions? First of all, the mass media. You will notice how they tend to move in a certain direction. So if there is a very bloody event, that will be put on the first page for you to see very well. And beautiful news or pieces of information will get a little piece at the bottom. But the blood, the suffering, and the horror will be placed in your face. That, of course, has an effect. And based on the effect, you can see what was the intention behind. Whether that was conscious, that is the editor-in-chief of the newspaper wants to serve the control system, or whether he's just unconscious and is pushed to do that, that is really not very important at this point. What counts is the effect that it may or may not have upon us. If you ask an editor of some newspaper, he might say, oh, but we are in a market economy, so I must give people what they want. And that is an understandable answer for somebody who has certain state of consciousness. His mission has never been to wake people up. His mission is to make money for the owners of the newspaper. So that is what he will try to do. Another mechanism is movies. Movies can serve the same purpose. And you will see that there is an intensification of a certain type of movies that go into production in certain periods. Let me just cite one of them. How many horror movies have been produced in the last 20 years? Do you have an idea? Well, when I was a child, that means in the 70s, I remember that there were a few. Now, if you look at the horror category in a list of movies, well, I'm not advising you to do that, but if you do, you will see that there are hundreds, and they develop into series, and then they spawn toys and gadgets. People dress like monsters on carnivals, etc. So there has been a huge increase. Well, what is closer to fear than horror? So do the maths and you will see that there is some sort of intention there. But also other movies, those which show you that there is a corrupt state, for example, or those that show you that there is a hidden layer of reality from which terrible things happen. There is an interesting theory that says we have to be shown the actions that the control system plans before they can be carried out. And they sort of need our permission, our assent, before they can do that. And a passive attitude towards certain movies is equivalent to an okay for the relative actions to be carried out. So in other words, if we see something that we should be outraged about and we are not, then we are somehow saying, yes, that's all right. Now multiply this by millions of viewers and you will get a sort of collective nod by humanity to say, yes, go ahead. That is an interesting way of explaining why certain contents seem to appear in a recurrent fashion in movies. So between your newscast and the movies you watch, you have already a very powerful force pushing you down towards fear and the acceptance of a dark dystopia. And then what happens? The movie is interrupted and you got advertising. Now, I used to consider that a nuisance. Now, sometimes I see that with some relief because the movie was so heavy. But seriously, advertising is the other part of that, where they're not trying to scare us, of course. They're just trying to take away our resources, to lead us into buying things that we normally don't need. Now, we might say, oh, well, but I'm free to choose whether I will buy that or not. I would say you are if you are conscious. Otherwise, it will just be the reaction of your ego. So you are presented with a possible reality in which you are wearing certain type of clothes, and then you will feel you are cooler or you are more beautiful, and then your friends will look up to you and they will consider you a lot better, and your ego wants to be looked at in that way. So what type of choice do you have? You don't have a choice. If it's the ego that is watching that advertising, you will feel compelled to buying. And by the way, compulsive buying is already recognized as an ordinary illness in our times. So these are some of the methods. The other ones are, of course, if you are inside a cult or a certain type of religion, all the preaching which happens is meant to push you in a certain direction. There is a difference here with respect to the mechanism that is being used. So while advertising and fear-mongering, they try to act upon your ego, a false religion or a cult will try to attract your naive essence into a trap. So there is a different attitude with which we approach the trap. One is the ego. One is an underdeveloped essence, which recognizes a bit of truth, as we mentioned already. And since there is a sincere thirst for development, a yearning for the truth, we recognize that there might be something that is good for us. Then, of course, we get hooked, and around the good part of the bait, there is a lot of poison, and we end up chanting or worshipping creatures that we don't understand, and paying our money and using our time to feed beings about which we have no idea, with a feeling of, oh, we are going to paradise, or we're doing the good of humanity. So there are different ways, different mechanisms to attract us towards situations where we are then used as energy sources or sources of lush. There is this energy which comes out of somebody who is in trouble, who is suffering. There are a couple of authors that I would like to mention here who are good reads with respect to this harvesting mechanism. Well, there are a lot. So let me just say again, Robert Monroe is the person who created the word for lush. He was not so much into inner development as we mean that, but he was a pioneer into the world of the subtle realms. So a person that we should all be grateful to, like others. The other one that we mentioned is, well, I was going to say a Jesuit, but let's say a man called Salvador Freixedo. He is Spanish. Why do I make a distinction between saying a man and a priest? Because when I say he is an engineer, he is a priest, he is a plumber, I am creating in your mind a connection that somehow limits what you can see about this person. And consciously or not, you may discover, for example, that the label that was attached to this person when you first met the person sticks there forever and creates an automated judgment. I know people who say, oh, well, he's just a peasant, or, well, he's an artisan, as if this was automatically equivalent to say he has a low value in my esteem. This is absolutely wrong, but is a mechanical way of creating labels and then suffering the consequences. So, closing parenthesis, Salvador Freixedo, a great man from Spain, recently died at, I think, 94 years old. He has written books that are not always translated in English, but are really worth looking for. And I think we had shared some interviews in English with him. There's also a book that was translated into English that our friend Carl has found, and I believe we have shared that, but maybe if Carl can share again the link, that would be useful. Another one, and I know some of you are going to write in your chairs now when I say the name, is David Icke. And why do I say that? Because David Icke has exposed himself to ridicule and to being mistreated and criticized for years and years. And yet, undeterred, he moves on and says what he thinks is the truth. Am I saying that all that he wrote and said is correct? No, I can't say that. What I am saying is some of the things he said are very important. And that is enough for me to pay the fullest attention to his expressions and books and interviews. Of course, like in everything, we need to exercise our ability to discern and to discard what doesn't resonate with us. But, and just as important is, we must retain our ability to look at things with the eyes of a child who can see the new and take that in and say, wow, this is precious for me. Thank you. So when we talk with people about David Icke, that's quite a test to see how a person reacts. Because some may say, oh, David Icke, no, forget that. He's the one who blah, 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 blah. And that may be true. He may have made some mistakes, like, well, we all do mistakes. But have you been able to see also the good part? Or you are throwing away the baby with the bathwater? I see messages here that are helping the conversation. So, for example, Johan has written, it has become increasingly difficult to discern between information, disinformation, misinformation, and half-truths. For example, what is your idea about the Monroe Institute as it exists today? Not being a very deep connoisseur of the Monroe Institute, I will just say the little I know. They have developed certain techniques and resources to help in the exploration of our consciousness. They are somehow the technological point of view on the issue of exploring consciousness. So I consider that very useful if you do not limit yourself to that. So use what they can give you with a grain of salt. Consider that they may not be able to teach you about the depths of yourselves, that is what happens in the direction where we come from, the divine, but they may be a great guidance when it comes to exploring the astral realm, for example. So my personal suggestion, even though I cannot express a very, very deep knowledge about them, is be bold, dare to go and see, for example, the Monroe Institute. Make your own opinion based on your best judgment, and always be aware, cautious, but also open. With this attitude, you will gain a lot, and you will be less susceptible to being caught in a trap. And if you really need to learn something by falling in the trap, be assured you will fall in the trap. But that will be a step towards your growth. I know it's a bit of an oracle type of answer that says and says not. But maybe this is because a clear-cut answer on such a question may be a limitation for you more than a help. So try to take that for what it can give you.
The reason, do you hear me? You hear
yes,
me?
I can hear you. Who are you?
Johan, here.
Yes, Johan.
The reason why I asked was because I've read the 3 books by Monroe, and I think they're, like you say, very, very good. But a thing I heard is that the Monroe Institute, while he created it, initially it was good, but it got hijacked by the 3-letter organisms, and it's, for the moment, it's not what it used to be. So I just wanted to have your opinion on that. I don't know, that's what I meant with information, misinformation. You know, what is it? If you read the books, you know, he wrote them, you know what's in there. I think that information you can pretty much rely on. But I know people, well, that in the past have been to the Monroe Institute, and they describe their experiences. And if it's long ago, it was good. If it's not long ago, it looks like something has happened there. So I would say, you know, sort of warn, be careful. I agree with you. If you if you must fall in a trap to learn, you will. But I just want to have your idea if you had heard anything about that or not.
Yeah, thank you. Well, do not be surprised that anything that started well may fall into a sort of decay and involution. That is one of the normal cycles in the cosmos. So whatever starts will eventually decay unless something happens. And that event can only come from the territory of consciousness. So there is something called the law of 7, also called the law of octaves, like the octaves in a musical scale, which says that every process that happens in the cosmos will reach twice a point where, without a conscious effort, it will change the direction from which it was coming and divert at an angle. And again, when that happens the second time, the final direction will be, guess what? The direction it was coming from. So in other words, that no real change will happen as a result of any initiative unless that contains an element of consciousness which will push it through when the resistance comes, not from any particular being. It's just a law of the cosmos. So if you don't have that particular ability to keep things moving and overcoming that natural resistance that happens, you will see that whatever you had started will eventually turn into a completely unexpected direction and go into decay. And there isn't a specific creature to be accused. Let's say that it's one of the laws which governs our cosmos. Okay. As regards another topic that we had sort of touched with the limitation is the afterlife. There is a very interesting experience that was related and we've read about of someone who went into the subtle worlds with a guide and was shown several areas of the astral world, like bubbles. And when going close enough, these look like the representation of the Christian paradise, Christian hell, Muslim paradise, Muslim hell, etc., etc. As if these places were actually built, bespoke for each belief that we may have, and kept alive and kept thriving by our own thought forms. As long as there are enough people thinking about that, they will be there, welcoming people who believe in them. So this is a sort of interesting concept to keep in mind, that there needn't be a single absolute truth when it comes to matters of, for example, the afterlife. There is ample space in this universe for several possibilities and several versions. And they may express the fact that there is an infinite number of possibilities, and we just live and explore some of them based on our own development. This is something that is called the realm dynamics in books that I've read about. That is a way to say, what is our development considering all the possible directions in which a human being can develop? We will have certain areas where we are pretty strong and some others where we are not. And then there will be dimensions in which we are able to see and perceive, and others where we are completely blind. So when we go into, say, the afterlife, or we do an astral projection, then do not be surprised if some areas are totally invisible for you, which are very clear for another person. That doesn't mean they don't exist or they exist. It's rather than you are attuned and you're able to see them because they are part of your, let's say, realm. So before we say, oh, that doesn't exist because I can see that, we should be mindful and say, well, I can't see that, so I don't know if it exists. That is a more appropriate way to say that. Maybe today I can't see that, and tomorrow I will. Or I will never see that because I choose not to create that sort of reality for myself in the astral world. So I will never go to the hell of Christians because I consider that a horrendous concept which was made to create fear. Some others that live all of their life feeling like sinners, they may actually go there and spend some holidays in hell at some point, hopefully afterwards realizing that it's just an illusion and growing beyond that. But it doesn't need we don't have really a need to go in the afterlife to create a hell for ourselves. That is easy to do here and now if we are just away from our consciousness and we create problems, misunderstandings, etc. There are several ideas about what we do afterwards. Some of them are that we need to return here to improve. Some others are that we are forced to come here because there is a sort of a grid which bounces us back to artificially make us think that we need to come again, even if we are sort of ready to go. Which is true. Well, you may end up finding that the truth is somewhere in the middle, probably. It's easy to see that most of us are not saints or transcendent beings, so some learning is in order. It is also true that if this has to go on forever, then what's the point? So it makes sense to consider ideas, even if they are a bit foreign to our own habits, because they may stretch our realm into a new area. So my suggestion is, when you hear something which really sounds weird to you, don't just shy away and cross it out forever. Give it a bit of consideration. It might carry something useful for you. A very good book to mention at this point is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, also called the Bardo Thodol. I can't really pronounce Tibetan very well, but I guess you will find that if you search for it. That is the description of how to talk to a recently deceased person in order to guide her or him towards the next stage and avoid returning if it's not necessary. The simple fact that such a book exists is reason enough to consider these topics very seriously. Of course, in the Catholic world, they don't talk much about that. But if you just cross the border and go to the east, you may discover these things. They may have their own deceptions and problems, no questions about that. But moving around and being open to new ideas is very precious anyway. So here we are at the beginning of a potential search. Life with its obstacles seems like a minefield from a certain point of view, but also it may have something precious for us, like a diamond. In order to become a diamond, needs a lot of pressure and a lot of heat in the depths of the mountains, but at the end it can spread light like nothing else. When we start a search, normally the first thing we consider is, what am I searching for? Here I'm suggesting that the first question is not that. The first question is, what inside of me is directing my search? Because based on that, the object of the search will be very different. If you look at what is offered currently in terms of courses, seminars, and books, generally speaking, they will put in front of you a sort of bait, which is like attract money and luck, or get immediate respect from people, or become millionaire overnight while sleeping, things like that. Now, satisfying the desires of the mechanical parts, egos, inside ourselves is a sort of path of least resistance. That is the path which we choose if we are asleep and identified. And the type of satisfaction that we will get out of that is of the same kind. In other words, will last for a very short time, and then we will be again looking for something, and we don't know why we were so attracted by that thing, because when I had it, it didn't mean anything for me after 1 hour or 1 day. There is a sentence that recaps very well this sort of issue. That is, freedom is not doing what I wish. Freedom is being able to do what I must. And let me elaborate on this a little bit. So aspiring to a comfortable life in which we are rich and we can satisfy all the whims of our egos with impunity, that will lead us to a certain type of result. How far we can continue to do that? After a while, we may get a sense of void, and we may want to look for something else. And that is when the spark inside of us is activated. If not, then I'm sorry for you, but you will continue to do things in a circle, like over and over. This idea of repetition, of circularity, is very similar to the idea of imprisonment. There is a phenomenon that happens at quantum level that for an electron to change its status inside the atom, so to go to a higher level of energy, it needs to receive an incoming photon of light. Isn't that a good metaphor of inner growth? This is to remind us that as above, so below, so certain phenomena can be understood better at a smaller level of a microcosmos, and some others looking at stars and planets. Sorry, I'm looking at some messages here. Yeah, well, I think these are all precious things that have been shared. And as everybody can read them, I thank you for writing them along. So we've said, what happens if I just follow the path of least resistance? I let myself be hooked by some sort of low-level offer. And I bite that poisonous thing, and I will suffer the consequences. Then again, at some point, I may have a chance to wake up again. On the other hand, if we follow that subtle voice that we may hear, maybe whispering back to us in the valley, or maybe just in a moment of exposure to the beauty of nature, or at night while we sleep, or just a sudden intuition, well, then it's a different type of challenge, and it's a different type of reward. It's a plunging into the unknown. It's hard to understand what awaits us, and yet that little voice suggests that it is worth leaving everything else if we get the chance to go for that. There are parables and there are teachings about this you may find in the Gospels and certainly in other writings as well, that it is worth giving up everything that we consider important now in order to get something higher. And that is a choice that can only be made when you are in the appropriate state of consciousness. Otherwise, it will seem like absurd, pointless. Why should I want to do that? And that is the type of reflection that comes from our ego, of course. That will always get in the way when you want to do something higher. You will feel that all of a sudden you get distracted, you become lazy, you want to fall asleep. We are not immune to this type of condition. When we had the 5th lecture about the control system, about halfway through, I started feeling a drowsiness and a sort of heaviness that I was this close to saying, sorry, friends, we will start again next week. I'm not feeling like continuing. And that was not something I had eaten or drunk. It was, say, the mechanical resistance of the system in which we are. So don't be surprised if you find an unexpected resistance when you are pushing the boundaries and you're going deeper into yourself. On the other hand, the reward is just by the same amount, is just as wonderful as the resistance is fierce. So it's up to you to decide whether, when confronted with this choice, you take the red pill or the blue pill, speaking in terms of the Matrix movie. Do you feel like continuing your life as usual? And then you will think what you want about that brief experience of consciousness, or you will go down the rabbit hole and see where it leads. This is the call that you may feel. Not because I say that, but because there's a voice inside that is talking to you. I'm just echoing that. Little wooden puppet called Pinocchio had a friend, a dear friend, a talking cricket that would sometimes sit on his shoulder and try to tell him what was the right thing to do. And sometimes Pinocchio would just brush him off. Bad mistake, Pinocchio. You will have to learn the lesson in the hard way. And he did. If you have the opportunity to read that book by Carlo Collodi, he's an Italian writer, Pinocchio, which, by the way, is the little pine nut. Pinocchio is a pine nut, so it is a little fruit that may become a pine tree. It may or may not. And what a coincidence. It really looks like the pineal gland. It's not a coincidence, of course. Some writers get an inspiration which is fantastically deep, and they put such inspiration in such an innocent looking book like Pinocchio. A wooden puppet becoming a child. Don't miss that. You want to read it. I'd like to mention at this point is, sorry, I was reading again a message, but I think we may move on and let you share your messages in the meantime also with us. I'd like to mention a very nice event here. Our friend and brother in spirit, Thomas Minderle, has written a message for us. We asked him last week whether he would be happy to participate in this last lesson. And for those who do not know, that was because he gave us a fundamental help in gathering the audience and all the participants for this course. So as a way to, on one hand, thank him, and also to give him the opportunity to bring his contribution, we asked him if he would like to participate. He offered a different idea and said, why don't I write a short essay for you that you can then distribute to everybody? And he did. So I would like to then send that to everybody, but let me just mention a bit of the core of this message. That is, in my words, of course, you will then read his version. That we are to arrive at a point where we are free enough to make some choices. So we have been mentioning this. And when we are free enough to consider ourselves, let's say, disengaged from the impulses coming from the ego or the control system, then we have the great opportunity to see what is the real mission for myself in life. What is that thing that I've really come to do? On the other hand, we may choose to say, well, I have learned how to detach myself from these influences, and I will live in such a condition the rest of my life, like a monk in a monastery. That is a legitimate choice. But the other one is also very good, because we may not have come here just to learn ourselves, but to let everybody benefit from our talents and opportunities to do good. Writing a book, creating music. There are infinite ways to help others, either to just lead a better life or in their development towards better human beings or higher level souls. So once we are advanced to a point where we feel that we are ready to listen to our inner voice, then we need to fight to develop the skill to discern what our true impulses are and to immerse ourselves in them fully at will. That is, to become able to get in the flow and do the things we really love, those that will give us the best joy in life. The state of flow is that beautiful condition when you are doing something that you love and you're good at, and you do and do and do, and there is no fatigue, there is no difficulty. Things just come out of your hands or your mind effortlessly. And these are things which benefit not only yourself, but whoever is around you or gets in touch with you. And if we are able to get to a point where we do the things that we truly feel like doing, we tread something that has been called the path with the heart. This is a phrase by an author called Teun Mares. And you will get the best satisfaction and the best results for your energy. I would like to thank Tom again for the many ways in which he has helped these webinars to come about. And last but not least, for this essay that you will have the opportunity to read, because we're sending that to everybody. So in order to come to a closing point before we talk about further things, what have you achieved, or what has been given to you in these last 7 weeks? It's mostly information and a bit of a taster of certain states of consciousness, maybe the opportunity to reflect on yourselves and looking inside, and then the joy to share moments with other like-minded souls because we are so dispersed and we are so far away from one another, that coming together, even for a brief hour every week, is quite a relief. At least we feel this is true for us. Of course, this is not the complete path to self-realization. This is a sort of map of the territory. And to be more exact, it's the map of the beginning of the path. Even though this is just a map of one part, you probably have perceived that it may be very useful in order not to fall into several traps, unless you really want to fall in that trap because you think that's useful, and then you're welcome. But it's a good skill to be able to learn from other people's mistakes. And believe me, in these lectures, I've squeezed several things from my own mistakes and what I've found. So I hope that they will be useful for you to consider. At this point, we would like to offer you a further opportunity to share some work together in a slightly different way, and addressing let's say, a concern that some of you have expressed, and I think it's a fair concern, that is, some of the things we say here may not be something we want to be broadcast to the whole world. So we would like to organize in the next future some meetings where we are offering a shorter topic and then a broader part for expressing what you would like to express and a conversation towards a certain goal. And we would consider just recording the first part, or better said, just publishing the first part. We will decide together whether we record the rest, but not publishing all that is personal, just the part which is of general usefulness. And from that on, it's just us. So we feel among friends. I hope that is the feeling you are getting, and of a useful interaction where we can be, let's say, the ones that give the starting idea and then do some moderation and wrapping up the session on several different topics that we would like to offer week by week, because there are many other things that we would have liked to touch upon, but even though we have used a lot of hours, we just can't cover them all in such a short time. It would look like a round table among us, some place where we are free to share. I have sent to all of you as a short questionnaire. Some of you have already returned your answer. Some others may want to do that later. Please do so if you feel like, because that will be the opportunity for us to improve what we have done. We plan to do this course in other moments as well, and also in other languages as well. First one would be in Spanish, and we are now about to embark on a campaign to make that happen. So whatever we can learn to make that better next time, that will be important. Another word from me before I give over the microphone to you is, if you have attended 5 or more lectures and you would like a small certificate of attendance, just write to us and you will get it. Now, be careful how you use that. If that's for your ego,